In this video, I will give you my final picks for UFC 303. As always, you can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. Real quick, if you haven't already, go back and watch the predictions video from earlier in the week. That's a full card breakdown that'll be linked in the description and in a pinned comment. And the streets are saying that's the best video this channel has put out to date. I'm not saying it, it's the streets. Put your ear to the streets, you're going to hear the same thing. As for our DFS approach this week, we'll start with value plays. So these are going to be plays at 8,000 and below, fighters you will need in your DraftKings lineups to make everything work salary-wise. You're going to need some dongs, and I have a few that I really like. But I'm going to do it a bit differently this week. Instead of just giving you the ones that I like, I'm going to tell you about what I think are some landmines, some traps, some banana peels that people are going to slip on, and there are two really that stand out to me this week. The first is Michael Venom Page at 8,000. I know that MVP's got that exciting style. MVP is a finisher. He can go out there, starchy, and Garry finally be the first person to test that chin that just waves around in the air. But if you watch the predictions video, you know that's not how I see this fight going down. I think Garry is going to beat him with his movement, with his footwork. I think he's going to mix in the wrestling as well, and I think he's going to really separate himself when this fight hits the mat. Nobody wants to strike with MVP. It's impossible to game plan for, totally understandable. But one, I don't think that he puts Garry out, and two, he's not going to score all that well unless he wins by knockout. A decision win's not going to get it done here for you, especially because of how patient he is, and he's going to have to spend some time getting up after getting taken down. You look at that fight against Kevin Holland, it was an amazing performance, but amazing performances in real life don't always translate to amazing performances in fantasy. For example, he scores 53 points in that fight against Kevin Holland, and based on the way he was fighting, it should have been worth 100 points, but it's not. It's kind of like if you play NFL DFS and the running back that you rostered just broke 6 tackles and only ran for 12 yards. It's only 1.2 points despite it being an amazing play. Don't be surprised when MVP goes out there at really high ownership and doesn't get it done for you even in a win. And the second trap I want you to be aware of this week is Brian T-City Ortega. Now, if you watch a predictions video, you know I like T-City this week. He's been there, he's done that, he's fought way higher level competition in the UFC. You put him in there with anybody that Diego Lopes has beaten on this 3-fight win streak, and he finishes them as well. But the problem with Brian Ortega is similar to the problem that you have with MVP. A lot of people are going to roster him this week, and when you look at how he scored historically, he's not really lighting it up. 85 points last time out and a great performance against Yair Rodriguez. Here are the 3 losses in the UFC: the injury against Yair in the first fight, the loss to Volkanovski over 5 rounds, the loss to Max Holloway over 4 rounds. Outside of that, he's only won. So let's look at the times that he's broken 100 DraftKings points. Well, he did it once against Korean Zombie over 5 rounds, and he had 3 takedowns in that fight. He had 2 knockdowns in that fight, scored 118 DraftKings points, killed it, but he had 5 rounds to work. Another 100 plus point performance was 110 points against Frankie Edgar when he knocked him out in the first round. These are great performances. If you're able to get this kind of performance from T-City this week, he's going to be optimal at 7,800. But if you look at the rest of the fights, that's not the case. Against Swanson, Moicano, Clay Guida, Brandao, Tavares, even in his UFC debut, he pops in this one. He tested positive. Okay, test positive, so it comes back as a no decision, but if you had him that night, you would have gotten 90 points for the first round win, plus the 9 that he's gotten you here, so you would have had 99 DraftKings points, still not breaking that 3-digit threshold. And one thing you'll notice throughout Brian Ortega's career is that he's not this explosive guy that goes out there, starches guys, or slaps on chokes really fast, at least not in the early stages. He settles into the fight, he scraps with you, it's a barn burner, and then he catches you late. It's actually impressive. You look at his run, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 third round finishes, a second round finish, he's got that first round knockout over Frankie Edgar, and then most recently a third round finish over Yair Rodriguez. If he does beat Diego Lopes this week, it's probably going to be in the second or third round. That limits his ceiling a little bit. So these are 2 value plays that I would really avoid this week. You don't need to X them out of your player pool entirely. If you're using an optimizer or something like that on KunithMMA.com and you want to have some exposure to them, cool, but do your best to be underweight to the field. These are well-known fighters. They're going to be fighting high up the card, and you're running into a situation where other players in the field are going to pass you the way water passes a rock in a river. You're going to be sitting there with this really high-owned fighter, and everybody else is just going to be going right by you, and you're going to hope, well, Ortega's going to be the hammer late. If Ortega puts up 85 DraftKings points, not going to cut it for you. So I just wanted to touch on that before we went ahead and gave you the value plays that I like this week. And if you don't mind, just like the video already, get it out of the way. Get it out of the way early. Get the karma moving in the right direction early. If you're new, subscribe to the channel. Comment something for the algorithm. Tell me who you think is going to be the highest scoring fighter on the slate this week. I'm going to tell you who it is, but let me know if you disagree. The first value play that we're going to be looking at is Silva or Jan Silva, whatever you want to call it. I'm calling him him a winner. I don't think it looks anything like that Weston Wilson fight. I don't think that he's just going to be bombing on Charles Jourdain and knocking him all over the place, but I think he's going to wrestle. And I think he does it a lot. And those who are able to wrestle score highly on DraftKings typically. We've talked about this time and time again. Grappling heavy approaches are the most heavily rewarded approaches when it comes to fantasy scoring because you get the 5 points for the takedown. You're racking up points every second when it comes to the control time. You're also in a position to land some ground and pound, and if you get a submission and get him out of there, you're going to get either a 90, 70, or 45 point bonus depending on the round that you're winning in. Last time out, he was 9,600 and really showed up. 115 points at 9,600. He was worth the roster this week. Last time out, he was 9,600, scored 115 DraftKings points. So not only was he super expensive, but he was worth it. Now we've got him down at 7,900, and I think he's just better than Jourdain everywhere. Jourdain has had a lot of ups and downs in the UFC, and if you look at the guys that he's beaten, the names don't exactly jump off the page. These aren't looking like names that would consistently go out there and win a whole lot of fights in the UFC. Silva looks like a kind of guy who's going to be able to do that for the next couple of years. His power, finishing upside, and most importantly his wrestling are what set him apart in this one. So Silva, one of the better DraftKings plays, one of the better value plays of the week in my opinion. Next value play we're looking at is Yuri Prohaska. Late hammer, right? If you have Yuri in your lineup, you know that nobody else is coming after him. So if he goes out there and wins, you're in a great spot. I think you probably need the winner of the main event this week given the way that these guys fight. But Yuri has only come out here and just dominated, right? 93 points in his debut, 119, 123, 25 in his last fight against Alex Pereira, but then he follows that up with 104 in a second round finish over Alexander Rakic. I believe this is the cheapest that he's ever been on DraftKings, and he can really go out there and lean on his wrestling. We saw him dominate the second half of the first round against Alex Pereira last time out, and he did that with the takedowns, with the wrestling, stayed heavy on top. We know that he's got jiu-jitsu to fall back on. I think on the ground he is way better than Pereira. I think Pereira just works his way back up to his feet. He's not going to throw up a submission attempt. He's going to be flat for a while until he looks to explode up, and he's one-dimensional. He's that other dimension's fucking amazing, but one-dimensional all the same. I think Yuri Prohaska just fights the right game plan here, gets it done. He's going to go out there and wrestle. He's going to stay on the gas. He's going to pressure him so he's not eating too many calf kicks. He's not going to settle in orthodox like he did in the last fight, and I think he's just going to land heavy from start to finish. It's hard for me to see a world where there isn't a third fight here. I think that these two are kind of just standing on the mountaintop at 205. I have faith that Jamal Hill will come back and get into the mix possibly one day, but as it stands right now, these two guys are head and shoulders above everybody else it seems. So I think a third fight is inevitable. But the only way you get a third fight is if you win the second fight. Like DC said, you can't have a rivalry when you're 0-2 on the guy. I'm paraphrasing, but you know what I mean. So Yuri's got to get it done this week, set up the third fight. I think that's what we would all want to see in the long run anyway. I think Yuri Prohaska gets it done, scores a ton of points this week. Another guy who's super interesting is Cub Swanson. Cub Swanson's not going to get a whole lot of takedowns. He might not knock out or knock down Andrei Fili, but he's going to throw a lot of strikes, and I think that's important. If he goes out there and lands over 100 significant strikes, we saw here he scored 87 there. Against Shane Burgos, if he got the nod there, it would have been 85 points. I think if you're floating around that number, you're in a good spot. If he's able to mix in the takedowns against Andrei Fili, which is not impossible, then that even increases his ceiling. But I think Cub Swanson is somebody who's going to be in a very close and competitive fight this week. I talked about this on the website a little bit. Andrei Fili doesn't exactly have a whole lot of dominant performances under his belt. He has a few split decisions in the UFC. Even the unanimous decisions that he's won has been pretty close, and I think that Cub Swanson can make it a competitive fight against somebody with Fili's style. Where he's going to struggle are guys that are really good finishers, guys that are going to be able to out-grapple him pretty easily. But I think against somebody like Andrei Fili, despite being 40 years old, we are going to have a competitive fight on our hands. I don't think that Cub Swanson wins. Not to pick to win, but I do think that Cub Swanson is worth value play consideration this week, at least being overweight to the field. And then my last value play is with Michelle Waterson-Gomez. I think that Michelle Waterson is the surprise fighter of the week, the surprise underdog of the week, the parlay buster of the week, if you will. Has she scored really well on DraftKings in the past? Early in her UFC career, yes, but she's not lighting it up typically, but I don't think that really matters here down at 7,500 when you start looking at the rest of the fighters that are available below her price. Macy Chaisson is interesting because she's probably going to get takedowns here. I think Oliveira might struggle mightily with the Ricky Simone wrestling. We'll talk more about that later. Hell no on Marc-Andre Barriault. Hell no on Andrei Arlovski. Hell no on Carlos Hernandez. And Yanis Ghemmouri, I actually have a little bit to tell you about that fight later. But Michelle Waterson-Gomez, I think she has a very winnable fight on her hands because she's the better striker. She has decent takedown defense. Gillian Robertson, if she gets stuck on the feet, is going to be in no man's land against a fighter like this. With the way that she throws those kicks, with the way that she manages her distance, with the toughness that she brings to the table, it's hard to emulate this kind of style in the training room, and I think she could really go in there and surprise and confuse Gillian Robertson in this fight. So don't be surprised if she goes out there and gets her hand raised and then rides off into the sunset with a W in her pocket. So the list ain't that long, and again, a lot of people are going to come up here to Michael Page, a lot of people are going to go to Brian Ortega. Anthony Smith's probably going to get some love after showing up on the optimal lineup in his last fight against Vitor Petrino, but these are the four that I like. These are my four favorite value plays. This is where I'm landing for the week. And now we can use these value plays to build some lineups, but I got two things for you before we do. One is if you want to start building better lineups, have access to the DFS strategy guide, lineup optimizer, data model, projections, you can visit kunithmma.com, grab yourself a total access package. It's going to give you everything. Not only those DFS tools, but the official betting article of the week. By the time you're watching this, you might have been too late on the prop of the week to drop in your email. So if you haven't gotten the prop of the week, but you want to know what it is, because it's going to hit this week, I can assure you of that. You can actually visit kunithmma.com and send me a message directly. You don't need a membership. You can send me a message directly and I will be able to tell you what the prop of the week is on the website. But again, for all the DFS tools, the official betting article, access to the community tab where we put the parlays for the week already. This, again, I feel pretty good about this week. All of that can be found on kunithmma.com. That'll be linked in the description and in a pinned comment. And I want to switch up the rhythm a little bit this week. So instead of getting right into cash games, I just want to show you what the can't miss slip of the week is for those of you that play Underdog Fantasy. For those of you that don't know, Underdog Fantasy sponsors the show. They're a partner of the show, more than a sponsor. I think that's how it works. I like using their service because I find it easy to use, safe to play, the payouts are fast, there's big winning potential, and I'm going to give you the can't miss slip of the week this week. It's right here as follows. The first entry, and you can go through here, get all the entries. You can get your free square for Payton to land over a half a strike this week. This is a free square, meaning that you are guaranteed nearly to win this entry unless he gets knocked out before he can land one punch. But I think he's going to land at least one strike this week. So you can go on there, grab your Payton free square, keep it moving. They also are going to give you a free special pick and up to $250 in bonus cash when you sign up using promo code Kunith or the link that's going to be in the description. All that's in the description. But let me tell you what the can't miss slip of the week is. So first, it's going to be Joe Pyfer higher than a half a finish. That basically means Joe Pyfer inside the distance. We feel great about that. Ricky Simone higher than 2.5 takedowns. He's going to lean on his wrestling heavily this week like he always does. 2.5 takedowns, that's nothing. That means he needs to get one takedown around, and I don't think he wants to play the punch and kick game with Vinicius Lockdog Oliveira. And you can actually see there on the screen that the multiplier for that is 0.8x. That means that this is higher than just normal likelihood. They know this is going to happen, so that's what you want to take advantage of. Payton Talbott, super interesting, 57.5 significant strikes. I want to talk about this because he's such a big favorite, because he looked so good against Cameron Simon, because he's a finisher. I think a lot of people expect him to go out there and just blow the doors off of Ghemmouri this week. He probably does, but I don't think he's going to do it in the way that many people think. I think based on what we've just talked about, a lot of people think he's going to go out there, starch him in the first 2 minutes. That's not what Payton Talbott typically does. Payton Talbott's 8-0, crazy high finish rate, has never won in the first round. And I'm not saying that like it's a bad thing. I think one can argue that the fact that he's finishing these fights and he's not relying on that early first round burst means that he's better than somebody who would rely on that early first round burst. But I say that to say this: if you look at his Contender Series fight, the dude threw 300 strikes, more than half of which were recorded as significant. He eclipsed 57.5 significant strikes in the first round against Cameron Simon. Yanis Ghemmouri is historically very tough, and his only TKO loss is kind of a fluke low blow. So just be mindful of the fact that that fight probably goes beyond the first round. Payton Talbott's going to put a whole lot of offense out there. He's going to go over this number, I'm pretty sure of it. Next, we're looking at higher than 3.5 takedowns for Reihi Saruya. Reihi Saruya is going to be throwing Carlos Hernandez from one side of the octagon to the other all night long. But Carlos Hernandez is a vet. He's been there, done that. He's going to be able to work back up to his feet. And Reihi Saruya, he's good on the mat, but he doesn't have elite control by any means. He's somebody who can rack up a lot of takedowns in short time. Think back to Jailton Almeida fighting Curtis Blades, where Jailton Almeida ends up getting the clinch, taking Blades down. Blades works back up to his feet against the cage, and he does it again. and again and again, and found himself with something like 8 takedowns through the first 5 minutes. I can see Reihi Saruya doing something similar. Rematting, getting you your 4 takedowns inside the first 7.5 minutes of this fight. And then the final piece is going to be over, or rather higher than 49.5 significant strikes for Cub Swanson. I think this fight goes the distance. You'd be hard pressed to find a whole lot of Cub Swanson fights that go 3 rounds or more without him landing this many strikes. I think he absolutely eclipses this number. We have him projected for around 66. As you can see there, a $20 bet would net you $420 because we're looking at, let me just show you, a 21x multiplier. You can play up to 500 on this slip. So for all you high rollers, basically the opposite of you, Oscar, you guys can go here, splash some cash, and get a pretty good return as well. Again, that's on Underdog Fantasy, friend of the show, link in the description, use promo code Kunith, all that good stuff. Let's build some cash game lineups for DraftKings. Now for your cash game lineups this week, I don't think we stack the main event because I don't think it escapes the second or third round. It's going to be one-way traffic, one way or the other, so I think one of the fighters isn't going to score that well, so we're not going to stack this week. Instead, we're going to go with somebody like Macy Chaisson, who's probably going to get a takedown or 2. Even in a loss, she should score us a decent amount of points. Look at her fight against Irene Aldana. She scored 43 points there, 25 in a loss there. What's her other losing scores? 27. I don't hate these numbers whatsoever. So Macy Chaisson, also with a path to victory. It's nearly at a pick'em on the betting line. She's only 7,400. The other punt I would put in here is Cub Swanson because, again, the fight's going to be competitive. He's going to land a lot of strikes. Even in a loss, he's going to score you a decent amount of points. Now we have 87.50 left over per fighter. This is where we can start to open it up a little bit. If I were in this situation, I'd probably go with Roman Dolidze. I'd probably come here to Ian Garry at 8,200. I might at this point grab somebody like Martin Budai because I feel like he's in a good spot. And I'd probably either grab somebody like Reihi Saruya or Joe Pyfer at this point. So we put Pyfer in there, leave 300 salary on the table, gives you enough room to play with some other things if you want. This is the cash game formula of the week. Let's move on to the tournaments. For your tournament lineups, one thing I just want to address, again, I don't think that Payton Talbott finishes this fight in the first round. Now, can he go out there, put it on Ghemmouri, score you over 110 DraftKings points like he did last time out and he broke the slate? That's certainly possible. We also saw in the fight before that, though, at 9,500, where I believe he was the most expensive fighter on the slate that night, 68 points because he was taken down and controlled, and then he got the submission in the third round. I think Talbott goes a little bit over-owned this week. If you just look at the gap between him and the second most expensive fighter on the slate in Reihi Saruya, it's a $500 gap. You're not going to find that anywhere else on the slate. So I don't think that Payton Talbott is somebody you should be dying to roster this week. Have some of them, of course. If he goes out there and puts up 125, you're going to need him. But there might be some value in being underweight to the field on him this week. Now, as for Reihi Saruya, this was the person I was talking about earlier. He's going to score more points than anybody on the card. There's a chance that he goes out there and lands about 7 takedowns in this fight. And I think that with the amount of control time, the takedowns, the striking along the way, even in a decision win, he's got a 120 point DraftKings ceiling. I think he scores easily more than anybody on the card. If there was anybody you would put into 100% of your lineups, in my opinion, I think it's Reihi Saruya. So let's start to build our lineup out around him. I'm going to come down here and grab some value plays. Let me grab somebody like Yuri. Let me grab Michelle Waterson, 8,500 left over per fighter. I'll come up here and grab somebody like Ian Garry. I think he's decent leverage off of Michael Page. I think he draws maybe less ownership than Michael Venom Page. 8,650 left over. You gotta love the first round upside coming out of Diego Lopes. Again, I prefer the Brian Ortega side. I think Brian Ortega wins, but as we talk about week in and week out, say it with me, it's not about playing the people you think are going to win. It's about playing the people who have the best chance of scoring a lot of points. Did you say it like that? Like word for word? If you did, let me know. We'll send you some merch. Because Oscar finally has the merch done. Yes? No? Okay, quick pause on the merch. Don't worry about that. But now we've got 8,900 left over per fighter. At this point, you can go with Dolidze. You can go with Mayra Bueno Silva if you think that she's going to pull a rabbit out of the hat and get a submission in this one, which I think is very, very likely. Or you can go with Ricky Simone, because you look at some of the fights that he's won. I actually did the math before the video started. 112, 106, 98, 131, 107. You've got 101 down here. You've got 89, 79, 121. He can hit that ceiling as well as anybody. And I say that to say this, the math that I did before the video, he averages 104.89 DraftKings points each and every time he wins. Technically not each and every time he wins, but that's the average amount of points that he's scoring in fights that he's winning. So He's somebody who you definitely want access to this week. I don't mind this lineup at all. You didn't leave any salary on the table, but I think you got different enough. Not playing Talbott is pretty huge. Not playing Pyfer is pretty huge. Not playing Pereira is pretty huge in my opinion, and I think you've done just enough with this lineup. Now, if you really wanted to sweeten the deal a little bit and shave off some salary, I think you can come off of Garry and go to somebody a bit lower owned in John Silva. You're good. Let's blow that up. Let's start anew. I think Joe Pyfer is somebody you're going to want access to. If you put Reihi Saruya and Ricky Simone in there, is there enough room? Can we make it work? People are on the edge of their seats. Can it happen? It certainly can happen. 3 of our value plays, 3 of our preferred options, more at that higher range. I love this. If you wanted to get a bit different, I think you could. I think you could take out Swanson. You can maybe put somebody like Chaisson in there, because I'm telling you now, I feel really good about Mayra Bueno Silva, but Mayra Bueno Silva, sometimes she just shows up and sucks. You look at that fight against Raquel Pennington, gassed hard. We picked against her in that fight because we knew over 5 rounds, she's not going to beat somebody like Raquel Pennington. There's no way. But Macy Chaisson, front of the crowd, starts taking her down, starts using that length, starts defending takedowns. It's going to be a long night for Mayra Bueno Silva, who will just pack it in. Like, she'll just be like, all right, I'm good, I'm done. So don't be surprised if Macy Chaisson goes out there and lights it up, because you look at some of the scores that she's put up: 111, 106, 75 against Marion Renault. You want to see something better against Renault, but 108, 111 there. She can score you a lot of points. Another 111 performance, 102. She could score you a good amount of points, and she could do it in a hurry. So if you want to plug her into your lineups, be my guest. Now, if you want to put the champ in there, you want to plug Alex Pereira in there, you can, if you think he's Superman, like so many people think. Diego Lopes, I'll actually show you what I think is chalk zone this week. I think these 3 in your lineup, you might as well not even enter into your contest, because so many other people are going to run it. But let's see what we can do salary wise to make this work. I think if you're already building like this, you're probably coming here because you remember the knee. You're probably coming here because you remember the Gilly over Vitor Petrino, 8,200 left over per fighter. You're going to be choosing here between Jean Silva, MVP, and Ian Machado Garry. You might run this lineup. This is the same lineup that your cat would run, because they walked by the TV one time while you were watching UFC. Does that make it a bad lineup? No, but I think it's going to be very, very highly owned, a very chalky combination. So even if you do win and the grand prize is 200,000, you're walking away with a rack. So now you might be thinking, well, how do I make this different if this is my lineup? Well, what I would suggest, you take Talbott out, you come here, you plug Pyfer in. You do this, you've gone way different compared to the other lineup, at least, because you don't have Talbott in there, obviously. You're leaving 1,000 salary on the table. Not many people are going to do that, and you have just as much upside with Joe Pyfer in there as opposed to Payton Talbott. Another way you can get really different too, because something I want to point out, you look at Alex Pereira, that win against Yuri Prohaska, he scored 98 DraftKings points. He didn't break 100. Didn't break 100 against Jan Blachowicz. 92 points against Israel Adesanya. 87 points against Bruno Silva, 87 points against Andrei Mihailidis, right? You take AP out of there, you plug in Saruya, you're in a good spot. You didn't roster the main event. That makes you different already. Left a little bit of salary on the table. You didn't play Payton Talbott. It's pretty good. Now, if you really want to just dial up as much strange as possible, the weirdest lineup you can come up with, I think if you grab somebody like a Gillian Robertson, Mayra Bueno Silva, back-to-back women's MMA, nobody's plugging that in, I promise you that. Come here to Jean Silva, so you got a little Silva to Silva connection there, a little continuity, a little chemistry, like when you're building FIFA lineups. You grab Yuri, you grab Anthony Smith, 9,100 left over per fighter. You could get anybody up here, but then you just completely break their ankles by leaving 700 salary on the table and going with the mullet from Mexico and Diego Lopes. Those are just some ideas, building some lineups, playing with some things. If you want to build better lineups, you can visit kunithmma.com. There's a tool that literally builds lineups for you. It's pretty intuitive. You can set the rules, make them the way that you want, make it do what you need it to do to give you the result that you're looking for. So if you're running 20 lineups, 30 lineups, 100 lineups, 150 lineups, you probably should be leaning on tools like that. And before I forget, we will be running the $1 winner take all contest on DraftKings. That'll also be linked in the description and in a pinned comment. So when I run these videos, look in the pinned comment, look at the description. There's a lot of actionable stuff going on in there. But that'll do it for the video. If you've made it to this point, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something for the algorithm, and I will see you in a couple of weeks. Best of luck at UFC 303.